The gym reeked of sweat, leather, and ego. On a humid Saturday afternoon, the sound of punching bags thudding in rhythm was interrupted by loud, mocking laughter. Malik, the Cobra. Daniels, the reigning city boxing champion, stood near the center ring, his gloved hands resting on the ropes like a king surveying his court. He was flanked by friends, sycophants, and a few cameras, his live stream already running. "Hey, you!" he called out, his deep voice dripping with condescension. Every head turned toward the corner, where a young black girl sat lacing up her worn sneakers. She was small, wiry, dressed in faded gym clothes that looked 2 sizes too big, her hair tied back in a simple braid. She hadn't even been looking at him, but now her eyes lifted, calm and unreadable. "You think you can just sit there and watch?" Malik smirked, stepping away from the ropes. "Why don't you hop in? Show us what you got, if you got anything." His words drew snickers from the group, and a couple of his friends shouted, "Yeah, give us a show." The girl, Imani, kept her gaze steady on him, her face betraying nothing. She wasn't here to fight. She'd come to this neighborhood gym to quietly train alone, away from eyes that might recognize her. But Malik's challenge wasn't a real invitation, it was bait. His tone made it clear this was about entertainment, not competition. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Man, she's just a kid," but Malik waved it off. "She's in the gym, that means she's fair game." He grinned, stepping closer. "Unless you're scared, of course." The silence that followed was heavy. Imani stood slowly, pulling her hoodie over her head and tossing it aside. Her arms were lean but defined, her posture relaxed yet alert. She walked toward the ring, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor. The crowd began to circle in, phones raised, eager to capture what they thought would be a quick and humiliating defeat. Malik climbed into the ring first, bouncing lightly on his toes, playing to his audience. Imani slid under the ropes with quiet precision. She didn't look at the cameras, didn't glance at the people pressing in closer. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, calm and steady like still water. "Don't worry," Malik chuckled, adjusting his gloves. "I'll take it easy on you." The smirk was permanent, the arrogance thick enough to choke on. The gym owner tried to protest. "This isn't a good idea, Malik." But the boxer had already convinced himself this was harmless fun. For him, it was just another story to tell how he'd toyed with a girl in the ring. A whistle blew to signal the start. Imani took one step forward, her weight evenly balanced, her hands rising into a guarded stance that was sharp, disciplined, too disciplined for someone supposedly new or untrained. A couple of older patrons in the back exchanged puzzled looks. One leaned toward the other and whispered, "She moves like she's been here before." Malik didn't notice. He lunged forward with a lazy jab meant to tease her, but she slipped under it effortlessly, pivoting out of reach. No counterpunch, no flashy move, just quiet evasion. Malik laughed louder now, as if to hide the brief flicker of surprise in his eyes. From the crowd, a teenager yelled, "Come on, Cobra, she's just standing there." Malik nodded, tightening his jaw. "Don't worry, this won't take long." Imani's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, so quick it might have been imagined. She was studying him, measuring his reach, his rhythm, his arrogance. She could already see the gaps he didn't know he had. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, the narrator's voice seemed to echo in the mind's ear. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Malik Daniels' life. The whistle blew again. Round 1 was about to begin. and for the first time in years, Imani was ready to step back into the fight. The bell's sharp clang cut through the humid air, and Malik danced forward, his gloves up, but his chin tilted in the slightest display of arrogance. He was a showman before a fighter today, his every move meant to provoke laughter from the onlookers. Imani didn't move at first. She stood in the center of the ring, her knees slightly bent, her guard unwavering. Her stillness only seemed to irritate him. "What's the matter?" Malik taunted, circling her. "Waiting for me to throw the first punch? Afraid you'll mess up your hair?" Somewhere behind the wall of spectators, an older man cleared his throat and muttered, "She used to fight before everything happened." His words barely carried over the noise, but another patron caught them and leaned in. "You serious? I thought she disappeared." The older man nodded slowly, eyes fixed on Imani's steady stance. 2 years ago, she was supposed to go pro. Then one night, the gym she trained at burned down. Her coach didn't make it out. A small ripple of murmurs traveled through the back of the crowd. The front row remained oblivious, still expecting a quick, one-sided beatdown. But the ones who remembered Imani's name felt a strange tightening in their chests. They'd seen her fight before, lightning-fast reflexes, a mind that read opponents like open books. Inside the ring, Malik threw a jab. This time it was sharper, aimed to sting rather than tease. Imani stepped aside just enough to let the glove sail past, then reset her stance without breaking eye contact. Malik's smirk faltered. "Okay, got some moves," he muttered under his breath. Then, louder, "Let's see how long you last." Imani still didn't answer. She had learned long ago that words could be weapons, but silence could unnerve an enemy faster. She kept her breathing slow and steady, scanning him the way she used to study fight tapes, looking for the flaws arrogance always left exposed. From the corner, a man in a faded windbreaker called out, "She's been trained by Victor Cole." Several heads turned toward him. "Yeah," he went on, "Victor picked her when she was 13, said she had hands like lightning. Nobody could touch her until that fire." Malik either didn't hear or didn't care. He pressed in with a quick 1-2 combination, expecting her to retreat. Instead, she angled inside his guard so close he could feel the faint brush of her braid against his shoulder before slipping out to his blind side. The crowd let out a soft gasp at the fluidity of her movement. Imani's mind flashed, unbidden, to the smell of smoke and the sight of flames devouring her old gym. Victor's voice still echoed in her ears. "You don't just fight with your fists, girl. You fight with your mind." She tightened her guard, determined not to let the memories shake her focus. Malik grew impatient. He lunged again, but his footwork was sloppy. The kind of misstep only someone too confident to notice would make. Imani saw it instantly. She didn't strike yet. There was time for that. First, she needed him to believe he was still in control. Outside the ring, the whispers grew louder. "That's her," one woman said. "That's Imani Cole." The name began to pass from mouth to mouth like a secret being rediscovered, and with it came a shift in the crowd's energy. Malik had no idea that the girl he was mocking had once been on the verge of becoming the youngest city champion in decades. No idea that she'd walked away from it all after losing the only person who truly believed in her. And he had no idea that he'd just stepped into the center of the story she was about to reclaim. The bell rang again, ending the round, and Malik returned to his corner with a grin that was starting to feel strained. Imani simply stood in hers, head bowed, breathing calm, as though she hadn't even begun to fight. The bell's metallic cry echoed through the gym, and this time Imani stepped forward before Malik could make his usual showy advance. Her feet were light, deliberate, gliding across the canvas with a precision that made a few people in the back murmur again. Malik caught the shift and grinned wider, mistaking it for eagerness. "Finally ready to dance?" he teased, bouncing on his toes. Imani didn't answer, her eyes locked on his chest, not his face, watching for the twitch of muscle that would signal his next move. Malik launched a jab-cross combo, sharp and quick, meant to push her back. But she didn't backpedal, she slipped under the cross, pivoting just enough to brush past his side. Malik stumbled half a step and quickly reset, his smirk tightening. He hadn't expected her to stand her ground. From the crowd, someone whispered, "That's Cole's sidestep. No one's used it since—" The rest of the sentence was drowned out by the rising clamour as Malik swung again, this time a right hook with real force behind it. Imani ducked low, felt the wind of the glove pass over her head, and in that instant her body moved on instinct. Left foot planted, right fist snapping forward. Her jab cracked against Malik's ribs, sharp enough to make him grunt. The sound silenced the room for half a second. Malik's eyes flared in disbelief. That wasn't supposed to happen. He stepped back, rolling his shoulders as if to shake it off. "All right," he muttered. "No more playing." He came at her harder now. Short jabs, feints, testing angles. Imani matched each move with calm efficiency, her breath steady, her guard tight. Every exchange told her more. He relied on power, not patience. His left side dropped after every hook. His footwork lagged when pressured. The crowd began to sense it too. The cheers for Malik grew hesitant, some replaced by sharp intakes of breath, each time Imani evaded with surgical precision. Inside Imani's mind, the world narrowed to rhythm and timing. She remembered Victor's voice again. The ring is a conversation. Make him talk, then answer in a way he doesn't expect. Malik feinted left and threw a right uppercut. Imani leaned just far enough to let it miss, then countered with a quick double jab to his jaw, not hard enough to knock him out, but enough to make his head snap back. Gasps rippled through the gym. Malik's smirk was gone now, his jaw clenched, and a bead of sweat slid down his temple. He wiped it with his glove, glaring at her. "You think you're better than me," he hissed, his voice low so only she could hear. Imani's expression didn't change, but her silence was an answer. The rest of the round turned into a chess match, Malik pressing forward, Imani giving just enough ground to lure him in, then darting away with sharp counters. By the time the bell rang, Malik's breathing was heavier than hers. As he slumped onto his stool, his trainer leaned in and whispered urgently, "She's no rookie, Malik. Stop underestimating her." Across the ring, Imani sat perfectly upright, sipping water slowly, her gaze fixed on the floor. She didn't need to look at him to know the balance of the fight had shifted. The crowd buzzed with a new energy. Phones were recording not a joke match, but the beginning of something they might talk about for years. And Malik, whether he admitted it yet or not, was starting to feel the first unwelcome bite of doubt. The bell rang again, but this time Malik didn't surge forward. He stepped out more cautiously, circling instead of charging, his eyes narrowed. The swagger in his shoulders had thinned, replaced by the quiet calculation of someone who'd just realized his opponent wasn't the easy prey he'd imagined. Imani mirrored his movement, gliding along the canvas in silence. Her breathing was calm, measured, and with each step she felt the pulse of memory rising, an unwelcome heat in her chest. It wasn't the gym she saw anymore. It was 2 years ago, the night the fire started. She had been training late with Victor, the man who had pulled her out of a rough neighborhood gym when she was barely a teenager. He had seen something in her, sharpness, discipline, and a hunger to prove herself. That night, she'd been working on footwork drills when the smell of smoke seeped into the air. At first, she thought it was someone burning food in the back office. But then Victor's expression changed. He told her to grab her gloves and run. She hesitated, confused, afraid. But the smoke thickened too quickly. By the time they reached the hallway, flames were already licking the ceiling. Victor shoved her toward the exit, coughing. "Go, Imani!" His voice was hoarse but firm. She took 2 steps toward safety before the beam above them cracked. He pushed her clear just as it collapsed. She never saw him again. The image slammed into her mind like a blow, but she forced herself back into the present. The smell of sweat replaced the smoke. The sound of sneakers on canvas replaced the roar of fire. But the ache in her chest remained, a reminder of the man who had taught her every move she was using now. Malik feinted left and tried to catch her off guard with a jab to the body. She blocked, her gloves snapping down just in time. He followed with a right hook, but she stepped inside it, her shoulder grazing his chest, forcing him to reset his stance. He was breathing harder now, his mouth guard flashing between clenched teeth. The crowd had quieted, not out of boredom, but anticipation. They could feel something building. "Why'd you stop fighting before?" a voice from the crowd shouted. Imani didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward the sound for the briefest moment. Malik caught it. "You used to fight?" he asked, between breaths, a mocking lilt creeping back into his voice. "What happened? Couldn't handle it?" She didn't flinch. She didn't need to answer. Her gloves and footwork spoke for her. He threw another combination, faster this time, but she slipped each punch by inches, her body moving like water. Then, without warning, she stepped in and landed a clean left to his cheek. The snap of the impact echoed, followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. Malik stumbled back a step, touching his glove to his face as if to check for damage. His pride, more than anything, had been hit. Somewhere near the back, the older man who'd recognized her earlier murmured, "Victor would be proud right now." Imani heard it, though it was barely more than a whisper. Her chest tightened. But it wasn't grief this time, it was fuel. She wasn't just here to take down Malik's arrogance. She was here to prove to herself that she could still step into the ring and own it. The round ended with Malik glaring at her across the canvas, jaw tight, eyes burning. But beneath the anger, there was something else creeping in. Respect he wasn't ready to admit. The 5th round began with no taunts, no smirks, just the sound of sneakers scraping canvas and the heavy rhythm of breathing. Malik's eyes stayed locked on Imani now, but it was no longer the look of a man humoring an opponent. It was the wary focus of someone who'd been caught off guard and was scrambling to regain control. He came at her with a sharper guard, snapping jabs with precision instead of the lazy swats from earlier rounds. Imani matched his rhythm, parrying one punch, slipping another, and firing a counter to his body. The thud of leather against muscle drew another murmur from the crowd. Gone was the easy laughter of the opening moments. Now, people were leaning forward, drawn in by the shift in energy. The underdog wasn't just surviving, she was matching the champion blow for blow. Malik tried to unsettle her with a sudden burst of speed, a jab, a cross, then a hook, meant to force her into the ropes. But she pivoted away at the last moment, sliding back to center ring. The motion was so fluid that Malik's glove cut nothing but air. "Focus, Malik!" his trainer barked from the corner. "She's reading you like a book." The words hit him harder than he'd admit. He'd built his reputation on being unpredictable, on overwhelming opponents before they could adapt. But this girl, this slip of a fighter he'd expected to humiliate, was dismantling his rhythm piece by piece. For Imani, every second in the ring was a conversation. She could feel away his weight, shifted just before a punch, hear the faint hitch in his breath when he missed. She remembered Victor's lessons. A fight isn't just about fists, it's about what you make them believe. And right now, Malik was starting to believe he might lose. He surged forward again, this time committing fully to a right cross. Imani slipped inside and let her left glove snap upward in a short, tight uppercut that caught him under the chin. Malik's head jerked back, and for the first time, the crowd erupted, not for him, but for her. His legs wobbled for half a second before he steadied himself, blinking hard. He raised his gloves higher, finally abandoning his earlier showmanship. His expression was no longer one of arrogance, but of raw determination. They traded blows in the center, Malik landing a clean shot to her ribs, Imani answering with a stiff jab to his temple. The sound of gloves colliding echoed off the gym walls, each impact met with shouts and gasps. Between exchanges, Malik spoke through gritted teeth. "You're good." Imani didn't respond. She was too busy calculating the angle for her next counter, watching the way his right shoulder dipped just before he committed to a hook. She could feel the tide of the fight turning, the weight of the moment pressing down like the thick air before a storm. The round ended with Malik stepping back, chest heaving, sweat darkening his hairline. Across from him, Imani stood tall, her breathing steady, her eyes never leaving his. For the first time all afternoon, the crowd wasn't sure who to bet on. The sixth round opened to a tense hush. The crowd had shifted from amusement to fascination. Their phones raised not to record a humiliation, but to capture a fight they suddenly realized could end in an upset. Malik came out strong, throwing crisp combinations, his gloves snapping through the air. He wasn't holding back anymore, and each punch carried the force that had earned him his championship belt. But Imani's footwork was flawless, pivoting, sidestepping, slipping just out of range. She was no longer simply surviving his offense, she was dictating its pace. Every time Malik missed, he felt it, the wasted energy, the sting in his shoulders, the frustration building in his gut. He tried to hide it, but Imani could see the signs, the slight hitch in his recovery, the deeper breath after each missed hook. She pressed in, testing him with a sharp jab to his cheek. He blocked, but the impact rattled him just enough for her to step forward with a right cross. It landed flush, snapping his head back. The crowd roared, and Malik stumbled 2 steps before steadying himself. He shook his head, gritting his teeth. "All right," he muttered. "Let's end this." He lunged with a left hook, overcommitting, his weight pitched forward. It was the opening Imani had been waiting for. In a blur, she ducked under the punch, pivoted on her lead foot, and let her right glove fly. A short, brutal cross to the side of his jaw. The sound was like a bat cracking against leather. Malik's knees buckled, his body folding as if the strings holding him upright had been cut. He dropped to one knee, one glove pressed to the canvas, the other hanging limp. The gym erupted, gasps, shouts, disbelief rippling through the crowd. Malik, the undefeated local champion, was kneeling before the girl he'd singled out to humiliate. The referee moved in, beginning the count. Malik's eyes were glassy, but somewhere in them flickered a stubborn flame. He rose at the count of 8, swaying but upright. Imani stepped back to her corner, her expression calm, almost serene. She wasn't celebrating, not yet. Victor had taught her never to drop her guard until the final bell. Malik's trainer was shouting frantically, but the words barely reached him. The noise of the crowd was a wall, pressing in from all sides. He'd never been dropped like that, not in the ring, not in front of an audience. The humiliation burned deeper than any bruise. The bell saved him from another exchange, and he staggered to his stool. The trainer shoved a water bottle at him, but Malik barely drank. He just stared across the ring, breathing hard, his pride in tatters. Imani didn't look away. She stood tall, shoulders squared, ready to finish what he had started. The 7th round began under a different kind of silence. It wasn't the idle chatter of earlier, nor the anxious hush before a blow. It was the heavy, charged quiet that falls when everyone knows the end is near. Malik's steps were slower now, deliberate. His gloves were up, his chin tucked, but his shoulders sagged under the weight of fatigue. Across from him, Imani's stance was still sharp, her movements light, every step measured. They met at the center. Malik threw a testing jab. She parried it, pivoted, and answered with a quick left to the ribs. He grunted but didn't retreat. He fired back with a right cross, which she blocked cleanly before slipping a counter jab through his guard. The crowd was no longer just cheering. They were invested. Every landed punch from Imani drew a wave of gasps and applause, and every desperate swing from Malik was met with a tension that bordered on pity. Near the back of the gym, a man in a worn leather jacket stepped forward. "She's fighting like she used to," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Then, louder, "That's Victor Cole's legacy in there." The name rippled through the crowd, some recognizing it instantly. Malik's eyes flicked toward the noise, just for a split second. Imani saw it, an opening born not of fatigue, but distraction. She stepped in, snapping a jab to his cheek, then rolled under his counter and buried a right hook into his body. The sound of air leaving his lungs was sharp, almost a gasp. He stumbled back, clutching his side, but his pride forced him forward again. "You're not done until I say so," he panted. Imani's gaze didn't waver. She knew the fight was no longer about skill, it was about will. Malik was running on fumes, trying to salvage the image he had built in front of these people, but she had nothing to lose, and that made her dangerous. She pressed forward, her combinations clean and efficient, jab, cross, hook, each one landing with precision. Malik's guard broke under the steady assault, his arms heavy, his counters slow. Then, with a quick step to the side, she let her right glove fly in a final snapping cross to his temple. Malik's body froze for a fraction of a second before he dropped to the canvas, this time flat on his back. The referee began the count, but the truth was obvious. Malik's chest rose and fell, his eyes staring at the ceiling, the fight gone out of him. The count reached 10, the bell rang, the crowd exploded, some cheering, some simply stunned into silence. Phones were raised high, capturing the moment the arrogant champion had been toppled by the quiet girl he'd tried to humiliate. As Malik's trainer knelt beside him, Imani turned and walked toward her corner, her face unreadable. She wasn't here for their applause. She was here for herself and for Victor. 3 weeks later, the gym was quieter. The roar of that afternoon had faded into a memory, though the video still lived online, passed from phone to phone, replayed millions of times. Malik's fall was now internet legend, his swagger replaced by a cautious humility in every public appearance since. The fight had been talked about on local radio, debated in sports forums, and even featured in a segment on a national sports channel. But for Imani, none of that mattered. She still came to the gym in the early hours before most people arrived, training alone in the corner. It was during one of these sessions that Malik walked in. He wore a plain hoodie, no entourage, no cameras. He stood by the door for a moment, watching her work the heavy bag. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. He crossed the floor slowly. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. I thought I thought you were just some kid I could clown in front of people. I was wrong." Imani studied him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "I know." For a second, he almost smiled. "If you ever want to spar again, on equal terms, I'd be honored." She didn't answer, just went back to her bag. But in the smallest way, the corner of her mouth lifted, and that was enough for him. 2 days later, the gym owner approached her with a letter. It was from the state's Amateur Boxing Association, a full scholarship offer to join their elite training program, all expenses covered. "They saw the fight," the owner said. "They want you in the ring again, Imani." That night, she sat alone in her small apartment, the letter on the table beside her gloves. She thought of Victor, of the fire, of the years she'd spent avoiding the sport she loved. And she thought of the girl who had stepped into the ring that day, not to prove herself to Malik, but to prove she could still carry Victor's lessons forward. When she signed the letter, her hands didn't shake. Months later, she stood in a packed arena wearing the colors of her new team, waiting for the bell. The crowd was deafening, but her focus was razor-sharp. Somewhere she imagined Victor's voice saying, "Now you're ready." She had learned that humility could be born from defeat, and that respect was worth more than victory alone. Malik had learned it the hard way. She had learned it by stepping back into the fire she once ran from. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.